All right, so we've now learned about the 4 essential models: the product model, solutions model, matchmaking, and multi-sided. And just before we move on to the next section, I'm just going to very quickly recap those. So the product model, essentially, I make you something and you buy it from me. Or I bring you something to a convenient location and you buy it from me. And this is, in a way, the model that some developers will be operating under. They're creating something and then selling it to a customer. The solutions model is essentially you pay me to do something for you, and this is the model that most of us as architects are operating under. A matchmaker brings together people who want to sell their vegetables and people who want to buy their vegetables, so people who want to sell their products or solutions with the customers or clients. And the key way in which these matchmakers differ from the products and solutions models is that they involve the interaction between 3 different parties. So the marketplace, eBay, they're bringing together those people, and that critical mass benefits both the parties, and the market owner then reaps rewards bringing those people together. And then finally, the multi-sided model, which also involves the interaction between 3 or more parties, but here the host plays a more comprehensive role, brokering that relationship, and the 2 different customer groups may never meet. So because mostly architects operate under a solutions model, what we've sort of set out to do today is try to find examples of where architects are maybe operating in more of a product, matchmaking, or multi-sided model. So that's kind of who's the Airbnb of architecture? Well, we'll see. Votes later. And so we're going to hear from 3 speakers who are going to talk about product. Then later after lunch, we'll hear 3 speakers who are going to talk about kind of versions of matchmaking models, and 3 speakers from versions of multi-sided models. And then after that, we're all going to be working in groups. Name badges with the colored shapes on them will define our groups. And we are going to be working together to propose new business models. Don't lose your name badges, and there will be prizes. But first, I'd like to introduce, and there you are, hello, Andrew Beharrell from Pollard Thomas Edwards Architects. Now, Andrew will be quickly followed by Carl Turner from Carl Turner Architects, and then Nigel Ostime from Rational House. And these are all these speakers are going to talk about ways that architecture may be delivered in the guise of a product model. Now, they've only got 10 minutes each. Alex in the front here is being very strict with timing, so good luck to you all.
So I'm going to talk to you about our work as architect developers. Somebody may have already mentioned that this morning already, but it's not that long ago that the RIBA Code of Conduct didn't permit architects to be directors of property development companies. It was considered ungentlemanly. And in 1979, they changed the code. So those of you who were around then, that was just in time for the Thatcher era, the big bang in the financial markets, and the property boom which followed. The founding partners of my practice, Pollard Thomas Edwards, were among the first to take advantage. And they began a series of property ventures, buying land and building new homes for sale in London, like these houses in Hampstead. And they focused on complex sites which required clever solutions, places which others couldn't be bothered with or couldn't see the potential in. They used to say that they'd only look at sites that had a high voltage cable running across the middle, or second best would be a high pressure gas main or a 3-foot diameter sewer. And they took on larger and more difficult projects. The one here contained, you can see bottom right before development, a gigantic substation. It had restricted access and it was sandwiched between 2 major railway lines. So I came along and joined the practice in 1984 as a Part 2 student, and I got to work as project architect on this PTE development for 20 shared ownership apartments. And it was a fantastic education in how to design with a clear focus on the customer, the brief, and the budget. Bill Thomas never let me forget that money is the only building material. In 1989, I became a director and I began to invest in our property ventures and to create new development opportunities myself. And this was one of the earliest of those for 90 homes overlooking Victoria Park. So you've asked us to describe our business model. And I guess these are the key points to make. The first one is that we make sure that our development activity is legally and financially separate from the architectural practice. And secondly, we set up single-purpose companies for each of our developments so that they're insulated from one another. The shareholders in those companies are those directors of the architectural practice, or partners as we now are because we're an LLP, those who want to participate and crucially have the means to do so. So at the start, we had to raise capital by remortgaging our houses, and we reinvested the proceeds of each venture into the next one. So for many years, we took out little or no profit. We try to fund all costs up to planning permission from cash, because borrowing at this stage tends to be expensive. On one project, we did widen the shareholding by inviting our wealthier friends and relations to invest, and that was a success, thank God, but the additional responsibility for their money was a bit uncomfortable. You've asked about our collaborators. As our development projects have become bigger, we've tended to do them as joint ventures with other partners. This reduces our exposure and it allows us to spread our money a bit further, twice as far actually. Although we prefer to build out our projects, sometimes the more ambitious ones have been sold on to bigger developers with deeper pockets. So we'll have funded the planning permission and all the related approvals to create a development, which is then oven ready to build. But just that process could easily cost up to or over £1 million in some cases. We've done a number of projects as 50-50 joint ventures with our regular partner Groveworld, which is a niche Islington-based developer. So we make all the decisions together, all the costs and profit are split equally, and we have complementary skills. So PTE tends to lead on the planning and design, and our partners tend to lead on the funding, the construction, and the marketing, but we're all involved in all of it. Other joint ventures have come about through more unorthodox connections. For example, some of you remember a time when all architects drove Saabs. Do you remember that? And all Islington architects had their Saabs repaired in a Muse garage behind Upper Street. It's now a posh tailor. The garage owner sold the premises and he used the proceeds to buy a dilapidated factory on Fish Island in Bow. This was long before the Olympics and the current development frenzy that's going on there. He didn't know what to do next. He got the site, what next? So he turned to his architect garage clients, which is us, for help. And that was the beginning of a beautiful relationship. So things do come about in quite accidental ways. So here's the diagram that we've been asked to do, the network diagram. It is a very simplistic representation of quite a complex process, but the developer at the center of our diagram, as you've heard, it might be a PTE company or it might more likely be a joint venture. So typically the developer buys land from a landowner, commissions a design, obtains all the requisite consents and then builds the development or pays somebody else to do it, and then sells the completed properties to customers. And the developer pays an army of consultants, which include architects, to advise them at each stage of the process. And you can see that satellite of design, construction, legal, and sales advisors there. So the relevant information travels around the team as required and in all sorts of directions. So you'll have probably worked out by now, this is probably both a product and a solutions-based model. But what is our product? Well, the first output, and effectively the product, is a planning permission, because this crystallizes the land value and it enables us to raise development finance. As I say, sometimes we'll sell at that point with planning permission, and other projects will build out. It all depends on the costs and the risks and the state of the wider market. When we have sold on, the architectural practice has seen the project through with a new owner. Because our projects are complicated, even the pre-construction process can take at least 5 years. This one took 10 years just to line up the permissions. So conventional developers who've got sales targets to meet, staff to pay, and shareholders to satisfy, and who require an annual return on capital, they couldn't afford to be so patient, but we could. This is also quite a good example of architects thinking laterally and thinking big beyond the site boundaries. So in this case, we bought at auction a scruffy builder's yard on a railway embankment, and the big idea was to deck over the railway, thereby extending the fragmented Victorian square and complete the missing fourth side. So in this way, an awkward little site, which wasn't worth very much and didn't cost very much, was transformed into the setting for about 150 apartments overlooking a re-landscaped London Square. The process of getting support from Network Rail, Islington Council, and the local community in this very precious conservation area required a lot of persistence, a lot of patience, and 10 years of investment of time and money. But in the end, both the commercial and the social returns made it all worthwhile. So why do it? Why do development? Let's talk about the commercial aspect first. Firstly, from the viewpoint of the architectural practice, our development projects, they provide a consultancy service to the development company, and they get a proper appointment and a proper fee. Our fees are quite generous, but we do expect initial work at risk and sometimes deferred payments, but it is a formal client-consultant relationship. And that's all to reduce the early development cash flow. Apart from that, the practice carries no risk. The development companies do. The development business benefits from having minimal overheads. We've got no separate premises. We don't have any dedicated staff. So this gives us the flexibility to react to opportunities as they arise and to the economic cycle. We can choose to do nothing for a year or so, and we have done. Development risk and reward is quite different from a consultancy business. Although you're using your skills and judgment to achieve the best end result, you're also at the mercy of market forces, and lucky or unlucky timing can make all the difference. So this makes development a risky business. It requires significant financial exposure, but the potential gains outweigh our typical earnings from consultancy. Here at Angel Waterside, and this is one with our partner Groveworld, we took additional risk by setting up our own construction company. We'd gone through a long process of two-stage tendering, the way you're supposed to, with established main contractors, and we found we simply couldn't afford their prices, which kept going up and up. This was a time of steep build cost inflation. So in the end, we built it by managing direct subcontracts. We sold nearly all the 84 apartments in 2007, just before the property crash. So timing is everything. We don't just do development, though, to make money. We do it because there's a virtuous circle between our core business of architectural consultancy and our secondary business as property developers. It helps us to think like a client and to bring to our third-party clients the understanding and aptitude that we've learned as developers. Development takes up a small part of our time, but it has a big and positive impact on our ethos and brand. And above all, it's incredibly empowering and fun to be able to link design and commerce in such a direct way, and to be able to explore holistic solutions which produce the best combination of outcomes. So in the last 10 years, all our development projects have been popular, profitable, and they won lots of design awards. So I hope that even the venerable worthies of the pre-1979 RIBA would approve. Thank you.
which is the humble shipping container, but also quite an exciting new regeneration company that we're in the throes of establishing based on this humble product. I've been in practice running my own company for about 7 or 8 years now. We've been doing lots of small projects, quite unusual in that we built most of the projects as well as small design and build contractors, so I had that kind of additional experience. Probably the project I was best known for is Slip House in Brixton, which was also on Grand Designs. Unfortunately, I had to sell it to do my next venture. But what I'm really interested in is all this empty land, the brownfield land that people have mentioned. How can we provide solutions to problems like housing and affordable workspaces? And I'm also really interested in the whole conversation about, the social responsibility that architects have in terms of, and I think we're ideally placed to tackle these issues around gentrification and the way that regeneration, actually creates lots of problems these days with displacement of existing communities. So we set up a social enterprise, a separate organisation called Makeshift. So there's about 10 of us in that organisation on top of the 15 people in our practice at the moment. I'm the only architect in that new organisation. And basically our kind of remit is to unlock the potential in people and places, and effectively at a simple level we're an affordable workspace provider. That's how we're starting off, but hopefully we'll move on to housing. So our model, I put myself up in the right-hand corner, but I'm also director of Makeshift. One of the projects I'm going to show you, Pop Brixton. So we've stood back a little bit after delivering a couple of projects and figured out how the model might work. So our kind of, our partners that we're looking for are landowners, because our model doesn't rely on us owning land. It's land that we can use short term. So we've worked out our business model works on a minimum of 5 years. So we have to get a 5-year lease on land. So it can be an empty land or an empty building. So we've basically set up an organisation, and then that organisation buys in CTA's design services. So we're the preferred designer, although we've been having conversations now with the kind of organisation about actually they might like to work with some other architects, to which we're saying, we kind of set this up to give ourselves work, but so we're negotiating about how many projects we do before we let other architects into the mix. But effectively we're also landlords, so we now have a sort of whole group of tenants that we call members, who pay their rent, who then pay into Makeshift, who pay our fees. I sold my house to invest some money, and that brought in other investors. We also used it as a vehicle to talk to developers that were interested to talk to. So going to them with a project and an idea, rather than just going and asking for work. And eventually, in about 3 or 4 years, the green loop was really important there. We'll start to get an annual return on the investment as we build out. The ambition is to build 1 project a year for at least 10 years. It started off as a really small idea, and many projects, I guess they evolve. You can't really plan them, but we've always had that very proactive approach. So we did a pro bono project for a local organisation at Hackney City Farm about 5 or 6 years ago, created some space using 1 shipping container. So our model is really simple. We built one at our office about 2 summers ago, myself and a couple of Part 1 architects, so we could figure out how easy it was to actually convert a container, how much did it cost. So we've got a kind of model of 10K to deliver a finished 20-foot container, 15 to deliver a 40-foot container. We won a competition to use this piece of empty land in Brixton for 3 years with Lambeth Council as our partner. We've got a very simple profit share model with them. They put the land in, we do everything else, so they get half the profit. We were way too generous, but it was an open competition, so you kind of blind pitching. We've learned some lessons there. So the idea was to create a mixed-use campus of workspaces, bars, cafes, lots of other things. With our social sort of enterprise ethos, it's also about training and mentoring. So we built the site with 15 apprentices from Lambeth Construction College that we paid London Living Wage to. It was quite painful. We acted as a main contractor, so that all of those small project experiences that we'd had. So it was by far and away the biggest project we tackled, but we managed to deliver it with no extra cost to the organisation. So opened last summer, the first phase, which was the bars and cafes. So it was instantly successful. We've been getting about 15 to 20,000 people a week through the door, so it's about 1 million people a year. And we're at the moment measuring with the council the knock-on effects to the local economy and the rest of the businesses in Brixton. It's a cross-subsidy platform, so the bars, cafes, I guess food places, the things that people know pop for, we really need that because those tenants, we're charging them quite high rents, and we also have a profit share of their takings. But we're not just pocketing the money, we're using it to develop the social enterprise spaces at the back of the site. So we've got a big co-work space with about 200 members. We've got lots of other charities and social enterprises like Bounce Back, who train ex-offenders from Brixton Prison. There's a radio station, lots of other things. That's one of our office pods. These figures are a little bit out of date now, so I think we've created 400 jobs on site to date. What that's led to now is a whole pipeline of feasibility studies. So this one's a huge site in North London for a private landowner that we're hoping to start work fairly soon. We're also working with other social enterprises, so this is just some paid consultancy work for an organisation who wanted to do something similar in York. A music venue guy who wants to do a backpackers hotel in a massive warehouse using containers with a bar and cafe. So again, this is a sort of spin-off project for us. Redevelopment of the High Street in Woolwich, but as a meanwhile project, not as a temporary project, with some bars and cafes. So this is for a private landowner. But again, using our model, so we're writing business models for the developers and proving that if we work in partnership with them for a minimum of 5 years, that we can deliver a return. We're looking at projects for housing. This was a big one in Silvertown that kind of failed because we couldn't get long enough on the site. We've also just won a competition to convert the empty floors of Peckham car park, so using the same model but not containers, to provide about 80,000 square feet of office space, artist spaces, maker spaces, event spaces, and so on. So again, this is in partnership. This is with Southwark Council, so we've learnt our lesson. We've only, I think they're 20 or 25% shareholders on this one. So providing sort of the smallest artist spaces, which are about £50 a month, the size of a car parking bay, slightly bigger studios, but co-work spaces, just keeping the building very raw, doing the least that we can because we want to expend the least resources possible. And I guess the knock-on effect for us is that, as well as the actual core container business now, is it has transformed the practice. It's now bringing us other work in. So we're working a lot with Southwark Council, 2 projects around Peckham Square. So this one's at committee tonight to remove Peckham Arch and build some mixed-use housing for the council, with a co-work space in one building and a gallery in the other. And finally, the last project. So this started life as a shipping container project, so a site behind the library, but because of the work we were doing with the council and our expertise in containers, we were the preferred partner. So this we received planning for this about 4 weeks ago, and it's 100,000 square foot, purpose-built drama academy with 2 theatres, cafes, bars. And the developers really wanted to work with us because they knew we had a great understanding of delivering buildings and working on tight costs. So I think that initial tiny shipping container, 2 or 3 years later, it's led to projects like this for the office. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl. Nigel.
Good morning. Hello, my name is Nigel Ostime. I'm going to tell you about a model for Rational House, which is a modular housing product. I think this is quite topical. Rational House was founded 5 years ago, or a bit more actually, but it's very topical now because government is talking about prefabs as a solution to help meet the current housing need. But really today I'm going to focus on the business model. And first of all, I'm going to give you a little background because a lot of this is really to do with, a lot of the message is to do with the journey and lessons that we've learned. Rational House actually started from a research project which came about, which resulted in a book published by the RBA Publishing called A House in the City, which you may have seen. And it looked at housing not just from a sort of architectonic point of view, but from the point of view of performance. So focusing on longevity, flexibility, and usability, and so on. And it identified quite a number of very successful low and medium rise, high density urban archetypes. This one is in Copenhagen, the so-called potato rows. Another type, the vecindades of Mexico City, was a particularly attractive, vibrant and an adaptable example with very high density. This one was constructed in 1912 in the centre of the city. Interviews were conducted with many of the residents, and all of the case studies were evaluated using a point system against 25 criteria. And they related to 5 characteristics, which were urban form, adaptability, space and light, construction, and sustainability in its broadest sense. And the results were summarised in the book, but also were realised in a prototype, which was a single new build house in Hammersmith. And the idea of this was to display those functional characteristics of the housing that had been studied around the world, but it also employed off-site manufacturing technology, which enabled the building to be assembled, in this case, in just 3 weeks after foundations had been completed. So this is the house being assembled. You can see it's sort of modular construction, and this is what it looks like inside. The prototype actually attracted an awful lot of widespread interest and acclaim. And if you were to look at our website, rationalhouse.com, look at the press page, you get a sense of that. It's not just architectural press, it's national and international construction and newspapers as well. And Hammersmith Council were interested in this and came along. They were just setting up an OJU competition for housing programme they initiated and encouraged us to get involved in that, which more of in a moment. So you'll sort of see the journey developing as I go through this. The book had demonstrated that a component-based system could create dwellings and developments of many sizes, tenures and types, and the panelised system could be assembled to create a single dwelling or indeed clusters of dwellings, and fundamentally it was about an urban typology. And they could be arranged in very compact configurations, and we have roof terraces and internal courtyards and basement living space and so on. And the book also demonstrated that, that these same components could be used to create developments like the international archetypes that the research had identified, such as this one. This one simulates that Vecindades in Mexico City. And we developed a pattern book of house and apartment types, where the shell was composed of standard panels arranged in different ways, and the open plan interiors were fitted out flexibly in a variety of plan arrangements. The one highlighted is one that was actually the prototype one. And we also adapted the system to the requirements of a number of private and public developments, clients to create, for example, city squares, multi-use urban infill buildings, larger multi-storey mixed-use developments, and larger urban proposals which included retail and as well, but also low-rise housing in a whole variety of formats. So there was a decision made to create a limited company joint venture with other consultants, and this group initially consisted of Rational House, Arup as engineers, Davis Langdon as they were for cost consultancy, and Reed Architecture. And we won that Hammersmith OJU, which was a framework for about 200 dwellings. Over a period of time, and this is a long story, and I've got to try and tell it in under 10 minutes. Over a period of time, there was a decision made to aggregate the professional services and bring it all under one umbrella, which we did with AECOM. And we set about establishing a brand, so we used the sort of pejorative term of prefab, tried to turn that around. AECOM, as you may know, is a sort of multidisciplinary behemoth with, I think these figures are out of date. I mean, it's I think double that size now. And they employ architects, engineers, cost consultants, and so on. And more latterly, they brought in construction services as well. So we had the ability to do everything. And we started to refine that component set that we had so that it was less bespoke and better suited to manufacturing. And this relatively limited set of components could be assembled to suit the particular constraints of pretty much any site. So this is this is the first layout, the first planning permission we got for Hammersmith and Fulham. and you can just sort of see the way the thinking was going here. We formed an association with a precast manufacturer, Herx, based in Eindhoven, and together with them we developed this 3D modelling and production facility where each component was created in a program called Tekla, which is Revit compatible, parametric software program. And this is actually a screen grab from the component model produced by Herx for the Hammersmith scheme, in which every single component is modelled. And the same view as a visualization for planning purposes to give you a feel for what we were preparing. And this is to give you an idea of the scale. Herx, enormous company, they had the capacity for us to create several hundred dwellings a year. So we've been asked to talk about the structure. First of all, actually I'm just going to click through these. So it's fairly standard. There's a sort of actual model, and there's probably what I'm going to talk about is a more optimal model. And the actual model is set up here. So we have the Rational House JV, separate client, and the client would employ the general contractor, who would employ the manufacturer. Rational House gets its fee partly from, in a fairly traditional way, a percentage of the consultancy fee, but also through a licensing agreement for some of the products. It hasn't worked out particularly well in the end, and we're at a bit of a standstill at the moment. So there is a sort of message here about how you go about doing these things. I think that's happened for various reasons, and it's to do with understanding the nature of collaborative working. Everyone has to do that. You must make sure that there are no sort of business as usual attitudes, and you have to approach these things from the point of view fundamentally of product-based design, and that wasn't always the case. As I say, it's a long story and I don't really have time to go into the detail. The optimum structure, I think, would really be, and I was talking about this with someone earlier on, the optimum structure would be a Rational House act potentially as developer as well, and we did set up Rational House developments to be able to do this. And there would be advantages of this, having single point responsibility for delivery and liability, full control over the product development, marketing, investment, pricing, and so on. Better alignment of aspirations of the participants and so on. So I think this would be the ideal model. The other one was the way that it ended up going. And finally, this is how fees are calculated in the two different models. So what actually happened, Rational House taking a percentage of the total consultancy fee plus a percentage of the total cost by agreement with the JV partners. The optimum, though, Rational House would be responsible for payments to the other consultants, to the manufacturer and to the general contractor, and they would then take a simple profit on the sale of the product to clients or end users. Thank you.
Thank you.